Welcome to my video series on breaking down the networking chains. I'm Dwayne Natwick. I am an author, trainer, and a product manager with over 30 years of experience. I have multiple certifications in the IT industry, including multiple Azure certifications. I am also a Microsoft certified trainer and a regional lead, and you can catch up with me on social media. Feel free to follow me at Twitter or request to connect with me on LinkedIn. And what we're going to accomplish in this video series is I want to break down each of the networking components within the Azure environment. A lot of the topics that are covered within a lot of other videos and content that's out there on the internet and in social media and on different training resources, there isn't a lot of deep content around networking and architecture. It's usually built into virtual machines or platform services and things like that. So what I'm planning on doing in this series is breaking down the networking components so that you can learn more about the networking side of the Azure environment and how you build out the networks within Azure, as well as how you can utilize those networking components for your hybrid networks. And as you can see on this slide, I have a list of topics that I'm going to use as a starting point. And today, in this video, we're going to start with virtual networks, or VNETs. But before we start in our journey down networking services within the Azure environment, let's first talk about how networking plays the role in security and your security posture and building a defense in depth. As you can see on this slide, there are many different layers to protecting your user data, your corporate data, your financial data within your organization. And networking is a key component to those layers. As you look at these different layers of physical security, identity and access, perimeter security, network security, compute, applications, as you build your way down to data, there are three key layers here that we're going to talk about as we talk about the services. Because as you can see on the left here, where we have a list of various services that are a part of this network security posture, we have firewalls and port rules, virtual LANs, encrypting, monitoring, role-based access control. All of those things have networking components to them that we need to take into account. And when we think more and more about security, we can think about building a secure house and how we architect our house to protect our belongings and our family. And security and networking within the Azure environment work very similarly. When you think about the building security, we have fences and doors to our house. For role-based access control, members of the family have keys to the house. For firewalls and port rules, we have different doors within our house to lock, that we can lock and isolate our own environments. Same thing with VLANs and encryption, everybody with their own rooms, our own access to those rooms, and that builds our cyber defense house as well. And when we're building network resources and building out our environment, shared responsibility is very important. And as we move through each of the services, we have different responsibilities in how we are building our networks, what we do in terms of network controls, and where our responsibility as a consumer ends and Microsoft's begins within the Azure environment as well as in the Microsoft 365 environment. And we can see here for on-premise networks, we have full responsibility. We build out and architect all of our controls, how we are going to have our network look, what our network's going to look like, how it's going to protect our environment, We build all of that. As we move further down the path with infrastructure as a service, we have still full control over our network controls and what we put into place. Many of that in terms of the Azure environment are Azure tools, but there are also capabilities to utilize third-party such as firewall appliances within the environment. We'll talk more about that when we get into our firewall video. As we move into platform services, Microsoft has in the Azure environment many of those network controls already in place, but many to provide an additional security and things like that, we need to subscribe into additional services that provide more controls. So that's why there is a shared responsibility here between Microsoft and the Azure environment, as well as us as a consumer. And then once we get to software as a service type models, such as Microsoft 365, there's very little control that we have over how the network is controlled. It is really just a web interface now that we are accessing that software and interacting with that software. So all of the control from a network standpoint and delivery standpoint is in the back end. Now, when we talk about Azure, we're talking majority of the time around infrastructure services and platform services. So that's where the services, as we go through these videos and talk about the different components of a network architecture, we will build upon and be talking a lot about IaaS and PaaS type services. Most of these services, as we go through around the layered security model that we're going to discuss, fall into the perimeter security and the network security piece. And that's where we are going to focus on and where we're going to start on now as we talk about VNETs. So what are virtual networks or VNETs? What VNETs are really the foundational piece and component around what every part of a Azure network is built on. It is going to be the first thing that gets stood up when you create a resource in conjunction with a resource group as well, which really isn't a network component. It's more of a structural component that we'll see when we create a VNet. But the VNet is that foundational network piece. It has the IP addressing and subnet for the resources that are within that network. And what VNets can do is they can help to segment those resources and services within their each of their little components or rooms, so to speak, and allow you to create how you're going to expose potentially applications within that VNet to the public internet, how users are going to access it through their role-based access control, and how we're going to segment all of that and then also interact within our entire network. When we create our VNet, as I stated before, we create our IP addressing and our subnet for our resources. And what we do then is if we have different VNets that need to communicate with each other, we create peering and utilize peering within the Azure subscription to have those VNets communicate with each other. If one of the key things around that is to make sure that our VNets don't overlap. And then if they do overlap, we're going to need to use a VPN gateway to have those communicate, which adds additional costs within our network. Key component around VNets is there's no cost to creating VNets. You can create as many VNets as you want within your environment, and there's no cost to that. There is the transmission and bandwidth cost that goes along with any of the Azure resources and how you're interacting with Azure anyway. But creating a VNet, peering VNets, and playing and doing different architectures with VNets, there is no cost to that, which is really helpful when you're learning and trying to devise how you're going to architect your environment. Let's jump into the Azure Portal and take a look at how we're going to connect to a virtual network. I'm in my Azure portal, and what I'm going to do just to start things off is we're going to create a virtual network. It doesn't take long to create a virtual network, just a few steps get you started right away in a virtual network. And as I stated here, if you, the resource group is a building block management component of a Azure environment, and if you don't have one created, you would need to create one. And I'm going to create my VNet in East US. I'm going to leave it to the default IP addressing scheme and subnet. But what you can see here is you have the ability to create your own IP address scheme within your environment. A VNet is a private environment, so very similar to your own private IP networking scheme. You can do whatever you want in here. If you leave it as the default, and as you create more VNets, it will automatically create a new IP address that is not overlapping on your next VNet. So it's very helpful from that standpoint. You can change the name here for this if you'd like to a different name. If I want to, if it's my web, I can make it my web environment. You have your security capabilities. We'll talk about Bastion hosts and DDoS protection and firewall in different modules. But you can see here, if this is a Bastion host VNet, we can enable our Bastion host right from here. And then we validate and create our environment, and our VNet then initializes to be created. And now, while that's enabling, let's go back in, and you can see very quickly we now have a virtual network. And I'm going to create another one here because I want to show how easy it is as well to peer a VNet. I'll name this one VNet 2. Let's put this one in West US 2. And you can see now my previous virtual network was a 10.0, and now we're at 10.1. If I was to change this to another 10.0, you can see this it gives me a warning that this overlaps. So if you have a virtual network and you're creating your virtual networks to want to also peer them later on, you need to make sure that they're not overlapping, and Azure actually will tell you if you have an overlapping IP address schema. And because I was messing around with that default, it took my default subnet out of there. But we'll make this my data subnet. And add that. And I'll go to review and create. And now my other virtual network is creating. And in a moment, that'll be ready, and we are ready. And let me go now back to my virtual networks and refresh. Oh, there's VNet 2 is now in. Not showing up yet. If I go into VNet 1 here and I want to peer my virtual networks, it's very easy now to get these two to communicate. So I made a web virtual network and a data virtual network. So architecturally, what I could be doing here is I have one VNet that is for my website, and I'm building my website apps within that VNet. And then I'm going to have my data VNet where my storage accounts are, or my databases are, that I need to access for my website for inventory, so to speak. I'm going to have my images for my products and data around cost and everything that's going to be pulled into my website for visitors to be able to build a shopping cart. So I've segmented those with my VNets, but they're going to need to communicate. So how am I going to do that? And that's through VNet peering, where I'm going to add now a peer from 1 to 2. And here is my VNet 2. And you can see I can't peer, obviously, with my own VNet. If I had overlapping IP addresses with any other VNets, it's going to say I can't peer those. So it's going to tell me which one I can peer. I need to create my VNet peer from 2 to 1. And all this is doing is this is going to create a namespace for the peering group within VNet 2 and VNet 1 for this peering. So it's really doing two processes in one. It's creating a peer setup within VNet 1 as well as a peer setup within VNet 2, and then it is doing the creation of that and then connecting those two VNets when I hit the create button. And here you can configure how the access is going to work. Are we going to have bidirectional communication or just one directional communication? Do the databases need to communicate with the web VNet, or is it just that the web VNet needs to communicate with the databases? So we'll just leave them both enabled for this time. Forwarding traffic is any traffic that goes into VNet 2 is it going to traverse from VNet 2 into VNet 1, or is it going to go from VNet 1 to VNet 2? So we are going to disable both of these, because in the scenario that I painted, we are looking at a web service where the application needs access to VNet 2, and they need to communicate with each other internally, but we don't want any traffic that's hitting our website to get to our second VNet and to our databases. We want that to go directly from the application to the databases. So we aren't forwarding any traffic between the two from that standpoint. If we had a gateway as well and we needed to have gateway traffic go to our VNets, we can create a hub and spoke environment utilizing gateways. And we'll talk about gateways in another video, but that's what this gateway transit would do. So with that, I've hit OK, and my VNet peering has initiated itself. And in a moment, we will see that pop up. And just that quick, our VNet peer has been created here. This is my VNet peer from VNet 1 to VNet 2, and it's connected. If I go to my VNet 2 here and go to peerings, you'll see VNet peer 2 to 1, and it's connected. So now we are connecting and communicating between both of our VNets. That ends this quick video on VNets as we go through breaking down networking within Azure. Feel free to follow me on the links on this slide, and I look forward to the next video that I will provide for you next week. Have a great day.